Welcome, Rob, to the podcast. So excited to have you here at Deeper Learning.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me on the podcast.
So, before we get into our topic today, why don't you tell me a little bit about your company, TVTP Solutions, and how that connects to working with schools?
Yeah, sure. So TVTP Solutions is a business that I run. The TVTP is an acronym for Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention. And obviously, that's sort of the impetus of my work with schools. Schools are very interested in preventing these types of incidents from happening at their school. So I come in, I try to explain to them how radicalization occurs, how that funnels into sort of a pathway of violence, where that if those individuals feel that violence is the only really way out. And then I work with schools on developing protocols and different ways of dealing with identifying those types of behavioral indicators, how they share information, both internally to the school and then externally to whether it's mental health or law enforcement or other social groups that are within their sort of jurisdiction and things like that. And that's really how the meat of it, but the real core of it is that we truly believe that this is something that can be prevented. That this is not something that we need to react to or prepare for, that this is something that we can actually prevent.
Mm, I think it's an interesting topic when we think about security and safety, depending on if you're coming to the table, so to speak, from um, I guess from a law enforcement perspective versus an educator
Right.
perspective. If you're looking at it from a prevention perspective or a response perspective. So, talk to me a little bit about the idea of preparation and prevention. I feel like sometimes these words get interchanged or thrown around. So, how do you clarify those? And for me, as a measurement person and trying to collect data around these things and understand how to evaluate success around these initiatives. So, how do you distinguish when something is maybe prevention and or preparation? Are they the same?
They're not. And metrics, as far as a unit of measurement for prevention, is a little bit murky. Um, you don't necessarily, but at the same time, a lot of the protective measures and a lot of the preparedness measures that a lot of schools take, whether it be sort of active shooter drills or putting cameras or metal detectors in schools and stuff like that, the metrics for their success is also rather murky. You can't say, all right, well, just because we haven't had an attack today. Therefore, this was money well spent, and everything is fine and dandy, and we're great. And I would say that it's more subjective measure, and it's something that what makes a more healthy environment to be in for a school is a more healthy environment for teachers, students alike, to be in an environment where their needs are sort of looked after, that if they have a problem, there's sort of an immediate response. There is more of a culture of care rather than sort of a systematic programmable way in which we do things. And I think a lot of what we do at TVTP is we go into schools and we sort of look at how the environment from the security standpoint and a prevention standpoint is done. Knowing that if you have metal detectors or if you have a lot of cameras and you have a lot of very overt protection type things, whether it be armed SROs or police, that changes the environment and that changes people's perception of the school and it changes people's behaviors as well. So it's a less inviting place to be as a teacher, which trickles down to a less inviting place to be as a student. And you end up almost having a blowback effect on a lot of those things. And so measuring out success is it is a sort of a backwards thinking process.
Mhm.
It's sort of you have to ask the question, what do we want to be at the end of this? And then sort of work your way backwards by asking, okay, then if that's where we want to be, what then has to be true?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than taking a more linear approach of, all right, well, now we're safe because we have medical, or now we're safe because we have these static cameras that don't actually prevent an incident from happening, but are more visible deterrents to try and influence behavior to not do something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That the word safe and safety, that's one that we explored. I was at an SRO conference where the idea of safety, are we talking about safety in terms of the security of spaces? Do we have uh, you know, two layers of secure doors and lockdown systems, or are we talking about psychological safety and that we have those spaces where people feel comfortable and they have that sense of belonging and they have a trusted adult that they could go to if they feel like something is not right, or they hear a student talking about something that could be a safety concern for someone's physical space. So is that, you go back to the culture, is there a culture that students feel like uh, they have others that they can turn to when there is a need. So really, it's my grad school advisor would always say, is that either or, but both and more. You want to have the deterrence for when you need them. You do want to have those cameras for when you do have to go to the videotape, so to speak. But you want to not need them. You want those as the backup, not as the main point of I guess, of safety. So maybe talk to me a little bit about maybe a successful program or initiative that your company has done, and maybe
Yeah.
some of the results that you've seen in the prevention activities that you've done.
So one of the, at least for schools, one of the most sort of return on investment things that we did was we got a bunch of school districts in need to incorporate their bus drivers into their behavioral threat assessment teams. Now, the impetus for that was to have sort of a proactive um, information type gathering thing for targeted violence. It morphed into something that was completely different that actually was even more beneficial because the targeted violence is such a sort of a sliver niche type of thing. But what these bus drivers were bringing back to the school was things like, hey, this individual used to be just standing at the bus stop. Now they're coming in a car that looks like there's a lot of stuff in the back. And doing a little investigation and finding out that, yeah, the family had been kicked out of their apartment and they were now living out of their car. And school had no ability or wouldn't have known that had the bus driver not seen that, and they had a mechanism for that sort of reporting, and they were able to get that family some assistance. Hey, this kid is being picked up at one stop but being dropped off at another. Finding out that there's some sort of domestic abuse or substance abuse happening at the house in getting that. So a lot of the prevention that we do for targeted violence is very multidisciplinary and can be used for a multitude of different things. And one of the things that I see as a hindrance for especially the schools is that around this time, sort of late July, August time, right before school starts, you see a lot of these professional development type conferences,
Hmm.
people speaking to them. And a lot of feedback that I've gotten from teachers is, well, you mentioned certain behavioral indicators, and they were very similar, and the risk factors were very similar to the same that I heard somebody talk about substance use. And then those were very similar to the suicide talk that I had, which was very similar to the child trafficking talk. And I didn't know which pathway or bucket to put these in. So I decided to wait to see if more indicators presented themselves. And I think that is sort of a pitfall that a lot of schools have, is that we have become so specialized in how we respond to student needs, rather than putting kind of all of them in the same bucket and then going out. So one of my things that I like to say, I kind of belittle my company a little bit, where yes, it says targeted violence and terrorism, but really this is more of a community health initiative. And that taking the lessons that we teach in our awareness trainings and things like that, can be used for gang violence, substance abuse, whether you're having issues with vaping, and things like that. It can really encompass a lot of different things. So one of those things was the success story was bringing those bus drivers in, not just from the standpoint of information gathering, but also, you know, understanding the dynamics of what's happening outside of the school, that's sort of beyond administrators and teachers' knowledge, things that just wouldn't get reported otherwise. Um, you know, moving into leaving, being kicked out of your apartment and moving and living out of your car is not something that would necessarily go to a threat assessment team, right? And so we try to sort of mitigate those team names to maybe a care team, is another thing that has been really, really successful. So going back to my point of bringing all these different issues into one bucket and sort of having a proactive approach on having to solve it, creating that culture of care rather than having specialized things that you are trying to fill into a certain lane.
Hmm. I really like that you've got the bus drivers involved. I know that it's always a challenge for your non-instructional staff to get coordinated in some of these initiatives. So having that coordinated effort and not naming it a certain type of training is so critical to make sure that everybody's being aware. I know our time is limited. This is one of those events where we're getting a lot of discussions done quickly. It's really exciting. Thanks so much for your time. I know it's a busy, busy day here at Deeper Learning, so appreciate you taking a moment to speak with us.
Thank you so much. And if anybody is interested, tvtpsolutions.com. All of our services are right there on the website.
Great. And we'll put the link in the show notes. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank
Have a
you
good
so
one.
much. Bye.